All right, so we'll start off. I'll ask Robin over here to read the prayer for me. Thanks, Robin.
Hi, everyone. Holy Spirit, we are here. No matter what you did yesterday, you can come to God now. No matter how much judgment and criticism you spoke out yesterday, you can come to God now. No matter how much you think you are hopeless, sinful, or bad, you can come to God now. Let everything that happened yesterday go. Let it go. Come to God now. All is forgiven. Amen.
Okay, Lana. Yeah, Lana, so we just want to have an idea about your story, about what's happened to you during, your life. I'm not sure how far back you want to go. You can go back to as far as you want. There's no time limit as far as this goes. Yeah, we're just interested in maybe even a bit about your upbringing and what led you to your spiritual journey and what led you to A Course in Miracles.
Okay, well, I can begin way back. And I'll try to leave out some details so it's not too long, but I'll start out with the day I met Jesus. I came into this world very fearful. I'm a happy person now, as you probably already figured out. I stay that way, in that state. But when I was a child, I was afraid of everything. I was the most fearful thing, and I really can't point to any reason. I had wonderful parents. My father was a candy maker. My mother was an artist. I mean, I lived in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, basically. And but I was terrified of everything. Especially the nuns and the priests at school. And I was so scared. I think I was in second grade. The nuns had my brother come down and hold my hand at recess, so I wouldn't be too afraid. And as luck would have it, one day my brother was sick and didn't come to school. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I was standing up against the wall of the school at recess, and I felt someone hold my hand, just like if you would hold my hand. I had all the sensory feelings of someone gripping my hand and holding it. And of course, there was no one there except the sensation of the hand being held. And I had this inner knowing it was Jesus. I just knew. And, of course, I didn't know anything about forgiveness. But what I did know that whenever I was afraid and I'd call on Jesus, my fear would go away. And I called on Jesus all the time, even into early adulthood. I wouldn't answer the phone without calling Jesus' name first because it was so reliable. But it was never, he never seemed to be the Jesus I was learning about in school. It was quite different. And so I always say when I left the Catholic Church, I just took Jesus with me, And then, everything, that dream fell apart. My father died when I was 18. My grandmother, who I adored, died when I was 15. And then my mother fell into insanity and this schizophrenia. And she was out in and out of hospitals, right after my father died. So the family sort of broke apart. And then I got married really young. I was 20. I think that's young to get married. And it was just to find a home again. And I didn't truly love him, and I knew I didn't love him. Like 2 weeks into the marriage, I knew I'd made a mistake. But being the good Catholic that I was, or I thought I was, I was going to make it work. And for 7 years, we kind of faked it. He was a good man, he didn't mistreat me, but I just wasn't in love. So, and then a few other things happened. I was still grieving my father really bad. It was like carrying a knife in my heart. And then I found out I couldn't have children. Some genetic abnormality. So I just kind of threw myself into my career. I was an artist and like my mom, and I got a really good job first as a designer, and then as an art buyer, and then as art director. So when I look back, when there was my marriage fell apart, and there was 12 years between my first marriage and my second marriage, and in that time, I guess it was in the mid 70s, that I was attending an S seminar, and I was reading people like Joel Goldsmith, Alan Watts, Ernest Holmes, and all these kind of New Age type authors and teachers. And I remember being paired in this S seminar with this young Jesuit seminarian, and he was reading the Course in Miracles, and it was the first time I ever heard of it. And so we were in a carpool together, and he would talk about it. And so I tried to find it in the bookstores, and I couldn't. So one day I called the Foundation for Inner Peace, and I asked how could I get a copy, and they said it was 3 books, and they would give me it. They would just send it to me. They wouldn't charge me anything except postage. And I remember the postage at that time wasn't very much. It was like $5. So I sent them a check, and they sent me the 3 books. But I didn't really, I opened up the text and was like, oh my God. But I did read some other authors, which led me to my first experience, which was really mind-blowing at that time. And I was reading Hugh Prather and also Jerry Jampolsky. And one of Hugh Prather's books had spiritual games in it. And they were like a lighthearted version of the Course in Miracles in the workbook. So I did this one spiritual game, and the name of the game, I don't remember the name of the game, but the thing of it was, for one day, just one day, I had to give everything permission to be what it was, however that showed up. The weather, let the weather be what it is, let the traffic be whatever it would be, and give my boss permission to be a grouch, give my my family, whoever showed up, permission. At that time, I think I I didn't have a child yet. So and then report back. So that day, I went through that day just as the game suggested, just giving everything permission to be whatever it is. And at the end of the day, I was to report back to the spiritual teacher to share my results. And it may sound really elementary to most of you, but for me then, it was mind-blowing because I had such a peaceful day, and it made me realize that I could control, my mind by my thoughts, and I had control over whether I was going to have a peaceful day or not. So that really got me into A Course in Miracles and doing it. And I was just devoted to it. And I had so many miracles early on happen to me with my job and in my life. I could go on and share that. So my life now, I really started practicing it in earnest, I guess, in the early 80s. And then I met Tom, and we were married, and he was much older than me. And when I look back now, one day he came home, he was a home builder, and he said one of his subcontractors and his girlfriend were having a baby, and they were giving it up for adoption. And he was all in if I wanted the child. And, he was much old. I mean, he already had grown children, 3 grown children. So for him to make that commitment was just, wonderful. And that was his purpose. He was just there to make me happy. So Maggie came into, that was September, and I met the birth parents, and we agreed that I would, we would raise Maggie and be her adopted parents. And Maggie came home with us when she was 2 days old. And when I look back, God's plan is always perfect, even though we don't realize it at the time. The time when I truly wanted the child wasn't the right time for me. I was really engaged in my career. I was in an unhappy marriage. That child came to me like a miracle at the perfect time. I had 12 years that I had worked, so there wouldn't be any sacrifice. I could really be a true mother and be, just caught up in the joy of it. So a lot of times when we think something bad is happening, I always think of God's plan is in this somewhere. I may not know it now, but it's always there. God's plan is perfect. And I have to trust. And that really taught me that I could trust God. So when Maggie grew up, she started having a lot of problems with drugs. And eventually, well, Tom died when she was 7 years old. And I got very sick. And that's another whole part of the journey. And a miracle happened. But just again, on the theme of God's plan for us, when Maggie fell into addiction with heroin, I didn't know what to do, and I got so many messages from Jesus, and finally I got the message that the only thing I could do for my daughter was to love her. That was it. And to turn everything else over to God. That means that I was going to be a loving presence for her, no matter how she showed up. And she could show up in a fierce temper or in utter devastation, but however she was, I was to be a presence of love. And then the worst of all happened. She had my grandson was taken away. She lost custody of her child, and the birth father moved to Nebraska. So for 2 years, and to get, she would have to go out to Nebraska, she was told erroneously by legal aid to fight for support. So the 2 years in between, Maggie started to turn around. When I stepped away and stopped trying to fix her, and I just took a position of love and peace whenever I was around her, she just started to turn around. And she is in like a 2-year recovery. She actually has a great job counseling other young mothers who are addicted to drugs. She's giving conferences to doctors on how they should talk to a drug addict and what was helpful for her. So she's really devoted her life and put it back together. And then out of the blue, one day we find out that Tanner, my grandson, is back in New Hampshire. And it was the perfect time. God, what looked horrible, Maggie losing her child, was what she needed to happen. She needed that time to heal, and she needed that time to pull her life together. So when I look at that whole situation, I can see another grand plan that's in place, even if I have no idea. I remember one time asking Jesus, what am I going to do? And the answer that came back into my mind, because when Jesus speaks to me, it's like thoughts I do not think. I'm not engaged. The thought just shows up. And most of my writings are based on my writing in the morning with Jesus. And so I asked the question, what am I going to do? And the answer came back, you're asking the wrong question. He says, ask instead, what is God going to do? And it was like the weight of the world off my shoulders at that moment, because I knew all I had to do was, again, just step back and allow God's plan to play out in time. Because even though the healing takes place immediately, because we're in this illusion of time and space, it plays out in time. So we have to be patient, and that's something I'm still working on. But there was a beautiful part in the course that I wrote today, was an essay where it was talking about we need do nothing. And it just says how everything is, when we trust God, when we accept his plan, everything is laid out before me. No obstacles are there. All the roads are made straight. Everything is laid out perfectly when I just step back and trust God. And so that's what I do. I trust God for everything. I trust God for my income, for my money. That's how I healed my belief in scarcity. One day, scarcity kept showing up, and I said to God, I said, I want to heal scarcity, and all I get is more scarcity. And then it was like a light bulb going off. It was like an aha moment. I realized that when I wanted to heal something, not to be surprised when that something that I want to heal shows up in my experience, because we always heal now, and we always heal in the presence, in a present state of mind. So, I have a friend, gosh, he's not on Facebook anymore. His first name, Ed Sheeran. You might know him, Teddy. You might know him, Robin. Ed Sheeran. He used to write a lot, and he says, if you're not feeling it, you're not healing it. And all that points to is a present awareness of that which you must heal. So the thing of it never had anything to do with the amount of money I had. Because if I believe that I'm safe because I have money, or if I believe I'm insecure because I don't have money, it's the same illusion, because I'm trusting an effect rather than a cause. My lesson with all of that was that I am sustained by the love of God. And when I trust that, everything always turns out. My balance sheet every month never matches up. It's never seems to be enough money there for the expenses that I have. But somehow every month something always comes up in unimagined ways. And I know they're from Spirit, and I know it's God's plan, because it's not anything that I would have, that I remember having or knowing in my past. And the ego thought system is very interesting, because what we do when we try to figure something out, the only place the ego thought system has to look is the past. That's its storage file system. And if I don't have an answer in its little grab bag of the past experiences, what happens is a person will think there's no answer to the problem. They'll think one doesn't exist if nothing shows up in the ego, from the ego thought system. But if I remember there's another thought system, it's the thoughts I think with God, it's the infinite mind of God. It's the mind that I'm part of. It's the mind that extended and created me. When I trust that, I can rest assured that I'm going to be safe, regardless of what the number is in my bank account. So that's another lesson I've learned along the way. And then I had some miraculous experiences, and I'm so glad that Teddy Robbins here, because the first one, it happened about 10 years ago, and you'll remember it well, Robin, because I hope you don't mind. I should ask you if you mind if I share about the night Dorothea passed, because I had a revelation that night. Could I ask you that question? Could I share that?
He's saying yes.
You have to say.
He's saying yes, Lana.
Oh, he said yes? Okay. Yeah. All right. So it was a bunch of us. It was about 10 years ago, maybe around 10 years ago.
I can't remember what you were going to talk about, but I trust you entirely.
Oh, I trust you too, sweetheart. All right.
But it was
we were together. I think
it was more
Teddy
like
and Vicky were there. Oh, we were. Pardon me?
It was more like 14 years ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Yeah. And okay, I'm not on mute. Okay, so we had this it was Ning, it was a little chat room, and Robin you ran it, and I think Teddy was there, and there were several other people there, people that that would gather and just hang out and talk about the course and share, much like this is. It was a video chat room, so we could see each other. And while we were there, Robin discovered his wife, Dorothea, had passed away in the other room. She'd been sick for a long time. Yeah, you remember that, Teddy. Yeah, Vicky, because you were there too. And something happened. We were all there for Robin. We stayed there, while he called the people that needed to come to help him. And we were there and we were supporting him. And I got this, it was like an inner knowing that I wasn't this identity called Lana. That wasn't who I was. It was such a revelation to know that I was so much more. I was so much more than this made-up identity called Lana. And I went around for days and weeks. You might remember, I know you remember Teddy, because Teddy gave me a nickname. He used to call me Not Lana, because I shared about it so much. But the revelation from that was that and I'm talking about on the conscious level, every bit of guilt I had about anything that happened in my life disappeared. with that knowing that I wasn't this made up identity of Lana. It didn't mean I didn't exist, but I wasn't this caricature that I thought I was. I was so much more than that. I wasn't going to say I didn't exist, but all the pain, and it was then that, remember I shared how much pain I was carrying around in my heart for my father. That disappeared. It was like all the pain of the past. That was truly a revelation. And and I always consider it Dorothea's gift. When I think about Dorothea, I think she gave me that gift. That was as she passed through. She passed away. She passed right through me and gave me that. And so I'm so grateful for that. And another time was when I was so sick after my husband. This was a huge lesson. After my husband passed away, my daughter, we found out my daughter had a bone disease. And she was breaking her bones. She broke her femur just falling off a still bike, just falling the wrong way off. And the doctors were really baffled by how can you break your biggest bone in your body just by falling off a bike. And we came to find that she had a disease called fibrous dysplasia. She had soft pockets in her bones, and it wasn't how powerful the fall was, but how she fell. So that happened, and then I had a series of abdominal ailments ending in 13 surgeries, abdominal surgeries. So this was shortly a few years after my husband died, and it's like all my happy dream was collapsed. That's the thing, and I wrote about it yesterday. It's like that's the thing about dreams. Like even happy ones, they can be happy, but they have beginnings and ends. They're not eternal. I couldn't keep a job because either Maggie or I was in the hospital, sometimes both of us at the same time. And I remember the 12th surgery, I contracted a staph infection and I almost died. At least my body almost died. And it was right after I woke up one morning, and I guess it was morning, I'm not sure what time of day it was, and a priest, because it was on the records that I was Catholic, was giving me the last rites. And my first thought was, well, this can't be good, this can't be good at all. And then, but I wasn't afraid. It was like a peace settled over me. And I was just laying there wondering to see what was going to happen next. But I did find that 23rd Psalm came into mind, and I remembered it. And that part where it says, though I go through the shadow of the valley of death, I will feel no evil. And at a point when we think we're giving up our body, and this has happened to me twice, once during a heart attack, and this, when we think that the end is there, something else clicks in. That's all I can explain it, is a something else. When I'm giving up my body, something else clicked in, because at first it was a realization that my body couldn't save me. So I lost all the value that I placed in my body. My body couldn't do anything. It wasn't going to save me. I couldn't depend on it. And this idol I had, this body that I thought gave me life, had failed me. So when I gave up when I was willing to give up my body, that's when this something else clicked in. And it was just a glorious experience. It was an experience of oneness. It was like there was no delineation between me and anything else in that room. I was part of the chairs. I was part of the tree outside. I was just in this utter state of bliss and oneness. It was the most beautiful experience I ever could imagine, and I certainly can't even put it into words. And so slowly, when I didn't pass, as I slowly came back to regular consciousness, it was like a 2-week period where I was still like high on drugs and I wasn't getting any, it was just, everything was bliss. All I had to do, if I thought of a worry, for instance, by now I was home, And I thought, you know, my daughter's bus stop was right outside the house. So I didn't have to worry about getting her from school. But I was thinking, oh my God, we don't have any food in the house, because I had just gotten home from the hospital. And as soon as I had that thought, it couldn't have been like more than 3-5 minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and she enters and she says, hello, I'm Sister Maureen. I'm going to be bringing you food every day and feeding you. And I thought, great, you know, and this was the way life was playing out. I'd think of a worry and a solution would show up. It was magical. And then one day I was thinking, oh my God, I got a car payment coming up. Like I must be 2 months behind by now. When I had that thought, bang, bang, bang on the door was my neighbor. And she said, you know, she came in to visit, but she had a check. And she says, we don't want you to worry about your bills. We want you to get, and when she said we, it was her and a group of people in her prayer group. Again, she was a devout Catholic. And she says, we don't want you to be worried about it. So she gave me a check for $3,000. It was enough to pay the car off, you know. And I really learned about what true love was. You know, people, you know, she was this gossipy neighbor that I always put up with. And here she was giving me such a gift. You know, I cursed the Catholic Church, and here was this nun feeding me and Maggie. You know, the drunk next door told me, don't worry about the trash, he would take it out. And I learned what real love was. You know, real love doesn't ask for anything. It just gives. So that was the greatest experience of my life. And when I look back on that, and it's truly when I found God. You know, I was, and when you get to, I look at it this way. We're always pointing back to God in every experience, either through gratitude or desperation. When at that time, there was nothing else I could put my trust in. There wasn't anything, you know, my ego grab bag was empty. It had no answers. So I had to trust God. But in that trusting, I found out that that's all I ever have to do. All I have to do is trust God, and miracles happen for anything. And a message came to me that time, and the message from Jesus was, you need not know the answer to a problem in order for it to be solved. And it was perfect. In fact, it became a mantra in our house. And in fact, a few months ago, Maggie wanted a painting with that quote on it to remind her, you know, and out of that, we created this slogan, everything always works out. And it does, everything always works out. No matter what happens, because here I am, perfectly fine. Although I live in a little room, not little, nice size room, I have everything I need. God always provides. Every so-called catastrophe in my life, every moment when I thought, you know, I'm not going to get out of any problem that ever showed up, I was provided for, because here I am. So I can look at that, and instead of, you know, instead of recognizing it during the catastrophe, I recognize it now. If I accept God's script, God's will for my perfect happiness, and I get out of the way, life unfolds peacefully. When I allow things to be what they are. The only time I'm not happy is when I want things to be different than they are. And the only reason they're different than they are is because I made up a story about them, and I believed in the story. Another time when I faced death was when I had a heart attack, and the thing, we just have a local community hospital here, and they weren't equipped to handle it. So they were trying to get a helicopter for me to fly either to Boston or up to Lebanon, and they couldn't get one. So I ended up driving in an ambulance with a doctor and a paramedic on this 1.5-hour trip up to the other larger, it was a teaching hospital, like the kind you have in Boston, and it was better equipped. And on the way up to the hospital, I had another heart attack in the ambulance that was taking me. And the doctors and the paramedics, they were dumping around doing all these things. And I was in a state of utter peace, just peaceful. That other something had clicked in again. And I had a knowing that everything was going to be fine. And it was perfectly okay if I stayed or I left. Either way was perfect. And so I just kind of laid there and watched all the show, watched all the action. And when I got to the hospital, they put the stents in. And, and I was fine after that. And just 2 years ago, this was really crazy. 2 years ago, I had started having trouble breathing, and I was coughing a lot. And they diagnosed me with this terminal lung disease called pulmonary fibrosis. There's no cure, and there's no treatment other than comfort care. 3 doctors said I had pulmonary fibrosis. So in the first few months of it, I had a lot of symptoms. In fact, I came down to Boston, remember, Vicki, and visited you when I had it. You were there, and I talked to Dr. What's his name? Can't think of his name. And I was telling him about it. He says, yeah, that's right. That's sort of confirmed what my doctor said. But if I'm honest, I never believed it was real. I never believed it was real. And Jesus gave me the message, let the doctors take care of your body and I'll take care of your mind. Because, the mind is what's going to heal you. So I did that. I just kind of walked through it. He said, walk through it with me. And that's another miracle I had. I can share with you if we have time. The walk through it with me miracle outside the IRS. So that was a big one. And so about 6 months into my fatal diagnosis in my life, they told me I had about a year to live, by the way. So about 6 months into it, my symptoms seemed to lessen. And they took another MRI and they saw that the growth of the scar tissue was very slow, was slowed down and wasn't being progressive. And so, I'm just, yep, okay. I'm just letting the doctors take care of my body, but I know Jesus is taking care of my mind, so I need not be concerned. And then the next MRI, they were just scratching their heads. They didn't know what to think because the scar tissue was starting to reverse itself. It was less scar tissue. And then the final MRI, actually it was the second to the last, it continued to show that. It was less and less of the scar tissue. And scar tissue just doesn't do that. Once it's there, it's there. So then they just told me, well, we must have misdiagnosed you. All 3 of them, they were all lung specialists. All 3 of them had said they would misdiagnose me. So, it taught me again that I could trust God for everything. I had no worries. And the thing about the IRS, when I first moved to Boston, I was a freelance artist, and I had my biggest year. I mean, I made a ton of money the last year, right before the stock market crashed. What was it, in 2008? And so that year I made a ton of money, but then the next year I made nothing because nobody bought art anymore. And my income went to zero, and I couldn't. Then I had this big tax bill from the good year. So I had procrastinated, and finally I got the summons from the IRS because I hadn't filed my income tax for that year, nor the next year. So I'm sitting outside the IRS, and I think our friend Devin was with me, and trying to get up the courage to go in. And I just said, well, let me meditate for a little while. Let me meditate. And so I sat there, and that's when Jesus gave me the most beautiful message that I memorized because I use it every day of my life. And he told me, just beyond your greatest fear is the peace of God. Ego will tell you, run, be very afraid. But Holy Spirit says, walk through it with me, and I'll show you it's not real. So I felt, and I still get chills when I think about that, because when I got that message, it was like, okay, I'm going to walk through this with Jesus, just like I walk through everything else with God, and everything's going to be okay. And of course, the people at the IRS could not have been more helpful, could not have been more kind. They did my taxes. And they told me that because of I was handicapped and I wasn't working, they were going to put me on a non-collectible status. And they say, well, whenever you can pay it, it'll be fine. and we'll set up any kind of payment schedule that you can afford. But right now, you need not worry about anything. And I saw that the fear wasn't real. I had made up an idea in my mind that this was going to be a terrifying experience, and I believed it was real. So I had to walk through it with Jesus, with God, never alone. I don't do anything alone anymore, to find out that, oh, that thing in front of me, that fear, I can walk right through it, like it's a cloud. It has no weight to it. It has no reality or substance to it. It's just like a shadow there. And if I walk through it, I'll see it's not real, and it wasn't real. So many things have happened in my life that reinforces and has validated my trust in God. And for me, two things, how I live my life. Number one, I live in the present. I try to always live in the present. And Jesus says, right in the Course, he says, time is the illusion. He doesn't say time is an illusion. He says time is the illusion. So whenever I leave this present moment, whenever my awareness or my focus leaves the present moment, I am traveling in time, and it's just my mind stays with God, but I am part of God mind. So the mind doesn't go anywhere. But my awareness, I say it's like a trip to Disneyland. There's Adventureland, there's Fantasyland, there's Tomorrowland, and there's also the House of Horrors, And our awareness, not our mind, our awareness travels everywhere except being present. Jesus says now it's the closest approximation we have to eternity. So the closest I can be to eternity is when I'm present with God. And Robin, this, being handicapped, we're more present than most people, otherwise we fall on the floor, So most of my day I get reminders, now be present or you're going to end up on the floor, So, but whenever I travel in time, and I have to, we live in this world, and it could be hell or heaven depending on how I decide it is. But most of my time, and you figure every lesson of A Course in Miracles, if I look at it closely, I'll see Jesus is bringing my awareness, all my awareness, to the present moment, to join with him in doing that lesson. Now, in this present moment, is where I ask for forgiveness. Now is where I experience healing. Now is where I ask for a miracle. Now is where I commune with God. Now is a happening place. And when you think of it, it's always now. Now doesn't change. The present moment never changed. Now, I can get up and go to the bathroom or go to sleep, wake up, go to the store. It's always now. It's always now. What leaves eternity is my awareness. And I know most of you, if you drive, you've had that experience where you've been driving 5 miles and you have no memory of it. It's like you weren't there. And you think, well, who in the heck was driving the car? Why my awareness was traveling. And it was me. It was the true me. It was the present me. The me that's the real me. The me that's always present with God in now, in the present moment. And I'm so grateful for that. Jesus has come in and saved the day many a time for me. So, and that's the way I live my life. I live a very simple life, it's a very quiet, but it's a very satisfying life. I've got my little art studio over there, my TV here, my computer, my chair where I meditate and talk to countless people and hang online and do my writing. So I have a wonderful life and a joyful life. And another thing I just want to touch on, do we have time?
We've got plenty of time, Lana.
Okay. So I think it was Annie, maybe. She remarks about my consistency in being at peace and being happy. And I've got and when I think of that, Jesus says in the manual, now when you're reading the manual, he's assuming you've read the text and you've done the workbook because it's a manual for teachers. But he doesn't talk about consistency very much in the course. But in the manual under honesty, he says honesty is consistency. Honesty. And when I'm being honest, my mind is aligned with the truth. My mind is aligned with who I truly am. And anything else is dishonest. So I can't have peace unless I'm being honest. And it points my mind to perception. And I've learned over the years a lot about perception through my experiences. And I found out that really it doesn't matter who seems to be projecting onto me or who seems that I'm projecting on. What's important is my perception of it, because that will determine whether I'm at peace or not. So one thing I practice consistently is responsibility for sight. If it shows up in my world, I put it there. And it's not, and Jesus uses responsibility. I like the word, sorry, Jesus, I like the word ownership better. You know, if I don't own something as my own, I can't heal it. I can't change it. I can't do anything. I can't offer it to God. As long as I think there's something outside of me that's doing something to me, I'm its victim and I'm helpless. So when I do that, when I don't accept responsibility for sight or ownership of my experiences, I give my power away. I have power when I accept responsibility, because when Jesus tells us we made this world was made through our projections. And what were our projections? Everything we didn't want. We project them out and we think they're gone. But, thoughts never leave their source. So what I share with you, I still own. In fact, Jesus tells us that's how you keep something, by giving it away, So I have to accept ownership, and that's for everything. And when I do that, I can come to the altar, I can come to the present moment with Jesus and just be honest and say, I chose wrongly. And look what's showing up, this crazy thing, an illness. Because I heal illnesses, as I've shared a lot with Jesus. And so, wait a minute, I'm getting a little message here. I keep guilt by giving it away. That's true. That's truly, everything we want to give away, we can end up keeping. In fact, we strengthen it within ourselves. See, everything's upside down and backwards. Perception is like crazy. We think everything we think is true. Happiness is knowing I'm wrong about everything. And when something shows up in my life and I believe that it's true, and then I'll have a thought, maybe I'm wrong. That's such a gift. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe it doesn't have the meaning I've given to it. Maybe there's another thing. And the only question I ask Holy Spirit these days, Jesus, to me, they're all the same. It's the one joined, shared mind of God. The one question that I'll always ask is, what is the truth of this? Because if I'm not at peace, then something's amok. What am I seeing wrong? What meaning have I given to something that isn't true? Or where have I assigned guilt? Where have I wanted to be right rather than to be happy? And when I'm honest, so consistency for me points to honesty, being honest and owning my perceptions. Then I can heal them. Until I own them, I can't be at peace, because I'm going to be suffering. I'm going to be at the effect of something. I lose sight of the causes right in my mind. That's where the healing is. And it's amazing. I live in this house, and the landlord is like, when I first saw the room, I thought, I love this room. It's a nice big room. It's got 3 nice windows, lots of light, room for me to do everything I need to do. But the landlord, God love his Archie Bunker mind, And I gotta tell you, the first few weeks were rough because, see, I had defined an Archie Bunker personality as bad. I'd made that up in my mind. And he was showing up perfectly. You know, I defined his personality and he was showing up as I defined him. And I had, you know, I had a moment of clarity, and I saw, you know, just as Jesus says, the secret of salvation is but this: you're doing it to yourself. So I decided to forgive my definition that I gave to him. I forgive me judging him as something that I assigned the meaning of being bad or wrong. And once I made the decision, the conscious decision to do that, it was amazing. Nothing he said or did annoyed me anymore. And we get along fine. I mean, believe me, we have nothing in common, but we get along fine. There's like a peaceful coexistence. I allow him to be who he is, and he allows me to be who I am, you know, and we do share cooking and some things, but it was amazing around, you know, how that was. And the same was for Maggie, as I shared early. When I became the peace that I wanted to see out there, it started to show up. When I decided to demonstrate, because Jesus says actually to teach is to demonstrate. So it's one thing to study, at least this has been for me, it's one thing to study A Course in Miracles, but it's a whole different thing to apply it to one's everyday life. When I say Course in Miracles, I do 24/7. You figure I was like 28 or 29 when I started studying it. I'm 71 now. So most of my adult life, that's been my go-to reference. And I truly don't know how to live another way. Like I said, most of my life has been based on teaching. And when I read Course in Miracles now, it's really interesting because I read the words and I love reading it. You know, I don't know when it turned into from a study into a devotion, you know. It's just a place of loveliness. But now, when I read either the text or the workbook, it's like I'm reading the words, but as I'm reading, Jesus is like editing it, you know, not changing anything, but adding content. And if you look at my books, they're like every margin, every white space is filled up. And a lot of information that I'm getting as I'm reading, I'll post on Facebook, you know, because it points me. I'm seeing, oh yeah, that's right, because I have an experience. That concept is right. I had an experience. And I can be a witness to the fact that I seldom ever find any spiritual concept in Jesus that I have an experience that's true in my own living, my own life. So I've come to trust it. And when I read it, it's not about learning or studying anymore. It's about just reinforcing and reminding me of everything, and I welcome it. And again, it reminds me of what I accomplished, because when I think of spiritual progress, for me, how I do that is to look back in time and see that I'm so different than I used to be. Things that used to upset me don't upset me anymore. The more I allow people to be who they are, the more they show up as being lovely and loving. And unless you have some questions, I don't know what to add to that. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to address them just from my experiences.
Like
it feels like old times. It feels like old times in Ning. It does. I love it. It's really great. I told Annie I'm going to visit often.
Excuse me, not Lana.
Not Lana, right? Yeah. But you know, that's an interesting point, Teddy, because for about a year, I didn't know who the hell I was. You know, if I'm not Lana, then who am I? So I had to, Jesus had to really help me get through that time. And he says, Lana's okay, but she's just the part you're playing here. You're so much more. You're a son of God. You have a shared identity with every soul in the universe in union with God. And, you know, so I can take this narrow point of view or I have infinite intelligence. Because I always think being awake isn't like a finite definition or destination, because God's infinite. It's always an expanding awareness, because creation is always expanding. So I can see where my awareness over the years has expanded greatly because of A Course in Miracles. Am I awake? Hell if I know. But I know I'm more awake than I was many years ago. I know that. So for me, it's been just an unfolding and a revealing, a revelation of the truth of me. I'm still learning about the truth of me.
You know, Lana, I remember that night that we were all on Ning with Robin and you. I remember how calm you were when you realized, oh, I'm not Lana.
Yeah, it was such a relief.
I run around and go crazy. I want to like tell the world, and I jump up and down, and you were just so.
Well, I did. I did. Did you hear me gather? And who was it? Marie, Neil's wife. She was having the same experience. At the same time, she was saying she's not Marie. I said, I know I'm Lana. It was so funny. It was so earth-shattering. I mean, it was really a crack in the metrics for me. You know, it just opened up. To finding out, because that's what A Course in Miracles tells us. It starts off telling me that you're a perfect, pure, innocent son of God. That's the truth. It's like that's already accomplished. There's nothing to do to fix. There's nothing to repair. The only thing, and even when he says you must accept the atonement for yourself, the atonement is a gift. It's a gift. And to accept it is to acknowledge that I am as God created me, and to live from that, to live for my perfection and not my imperfection, to identify with my perfection and the perfection of my brothers. And it's funny how perception works, because when I'm identifying with my perfection, everybody else shows up perfect. You know, it's because it's whole, it's one. And I can't do anything without affecting every seeming fragment of the one Son of God. You know, it touches everything. So I take God's creation with me wherever I go, and where I show up, depending on where I'm coming from a wounded, broken person, or from a complete, innocent, and whole Son of God. That's the world I'll experience. And I tell you, even though my life is simple, you know, I can show you my little room, you know, if you want. I get such joy out of everything I do. And I get such joy out of including God with it. You know, I mentor about 5 students, and 5 or 6 now, because I have a new one, it's 6 now. And they're just a joy. And Jesus is so right in sharing the love of God. In fact, I have a Facebook group called Sharing the Love of God, because when I share it, it like comes up in me. It's like when I share the love of God, I get strengthened within me. And I come off these calls, but these are mostly phone calls, but there's some Facebook calls too. I'm just high on love, you know. And I remember last year, this is another miracle story. I remember last year, my nephew lives in California, and he's a beautiful boy. He and Maggie sort of grew up together, about the same age. And I got a call from my niece, his sister, telling me that he had passed away from some septic infection. He was fine. I mean, he did have diabetes, but it was under control. And all of a sudden, he was gone. And I was shocked. I was literally stunned. And I remember sitting on my bed, and almost like a minute later, I got 2 urgent messages from 2 students. They were both having these crises. And I thought, oh my God, no, I need at least an hour to pull myself together. And the message from Jesus came in, oh, no, 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 no. You need to heal. And to heal is to join. So I decided to return the calls. They were Facebook calls, and to be with them and to share with them and to hear them and heal together. And I made both phone calls. And by the end of the second phone call, I was at peace. And I remember taking his picture off the mantle and just visiting him. We visited and had a beautiful, beautiful time, you know, and I was able to say goodbye to him. But I came from a place not of sorrow, but of gratitude for all the happy times we had together and all the joy he brought for my life. You know, I could be happy about it and at peace about it. But, you know, for a minute, I wanted to wait before I talked to these people, but they were the ones that healed me. They were my salvation, you know, to open up and talk and join and share the love of God, and sharing it, they healed me. And, you know, and I think of that often, you know, it's always, love is always appropriate. But yeah, I was living in Boston. I was living with Teddy and Vicky. And all of a sudden, this one eye, I don't remember, I think it was this one, I couldn't see out of it. It was like just a cloud of this brownish black gook in my eye. And so I think Devin ran me up to the local hospital, and they put me in an ambulance to take me down to a Boston hospital, to one of these, Boston I don't know. Boston has so many hospitals, I don't know which one they took me to. So the doctor in the emergency room, the first doctor told me that I had some disease. I think it's something your mother had, Vicky, that I was going to lose my sight and that I would probably lose my sight. He said, but I want you to see another doctor, a specialist. So the specialist came in and looked at my eye. And the whole time Jesus is just telling me, walk through this with me. Walk through this with me. Don't make any judgments, just walk through this with me. So I had that, you know, I knew Jesus was with me. I knew he was directing me. And once again, you know, it was like my focus was on keeping my mind present with God. But I let the doctors tell me what they wanted to tell me. So the second doctor said, well, it looks like you have a ruptured, what do they call it when the lining in your retina, your retina split or something. Is weak. I have a very weak, whatever that is around your eye. I don't know, but it's going to hemorrhage. But if I operate on it, surgery is going to just make it weaker. So, but he said, but our head eye doctor is flying in tomorrow morning. She's been on leave, and I want her to see you, and I will make an appointment. I'll see that you get an appointment for tomorrow. So I said, fine. You know, what do I got to lose? You know, I'm just walking through this. And so the specialist, the main specialist, she looked in my eye. It was a woman, and I remember her words. Oh my God. She says, Lana, I think we shouldn't do anything. I don't think we should. I think nothing should be done. I think it's going to clear up on its own. So I'm going to make an appointment for 2 weeks, and we'll see how it is. But my only problem was I couldn't focus, you know, with the one eye this way and this eye normal, I couldn't focus. So I had to wear a patch over my eye so I could focus. And but sure enough, 2 weeks went by and it was all cleared up. I saw perfectly. It was blood clotting or in my eye, and my eye just absorbed it. And as it absorbed it, the vision in that eye got clearer and clearer. So Jesus again told me just walk through it with them, and the doctors finally said it's fine. I never had any trouble with it since. So it was stay calm, just walk through it. Let God take care of it. I'm glad you brought that up. That was another one, you know. It's
I get them, Lana, and they just go away. There's no.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that, and no one with me knew it either. All I knew was this big blotch. I couldn't see anything. It was this big blotch of blood, and So, but anyhow, just walk through it. It's the fear, you know, fear is an ugly thing because fear will make us believe something is true. And everything, you know, Jesus says, we'll see what we'll believe. We'll see something and we'll believe it. And then because we believe it, we'll perceive it or see it. You know, it's like circular, you know, we'll perceive it and then we'll believe it. And then we'll, because we believe it, we'll perceive it. You know, so it's like a catch-20, spiritual catch-22. And the only way out of the madness is a miracle, is forgiveness. Because forgiveness is outside that circle of I'll believe it, then I'll see it, then I believe it. You know, because faith asks us, you know, instead of believing what you see, you know, instead of it's like believing in the invisible instead of believing in the visible. And that's so counterintuitive to everything we do. You know, usually we see it and we believe it, but God is asking us, no, you'll really see when you trust me and don't trust, you know, the man behind the curtain, like in The Wizard of Oz. You know, trust me instead, and then you'll actually see what's there. But as long as you're not coming, you know, you're not asking for it, you know, if you want to play around in time and space, you know, that's fine. And if you want to think an illusion of anything in that is real, you can do it. You've got free will, but I'm always here. I'm always here to bail you out when you're done playing around in time. And that's all we're doing. When we're not present with God, we're playing around in time. That's it. And because time requires space to have the time, the linear progression, we just make stuff up to fill the world, to fill it. You know, make up all these stories. And you know, it's so funny because when early in my learning, I had learned enough to know that I had a choice. And when especially if I got angry, I don't get angry hardly ever. But when I do, it's one of those emotions that I want to be right, you know. And I knew just the people to call. I had Course in Miracle people who would tell me the truth. And then I had unspiritual friends and family I knew that would agree with me, validate my position, and make me right. And depending on what mood I was in that day, I want to be right for another day or two. So I'll call these people. And then I got to the point, you know, I'm really tired of feeling this way. I'd rather have peace. And then I joined with my brothers to validate the truth with me and to make it stronger. And then forgiveness happens. You know, it's just, you know, it's really just a matter of letting go. It's really interesting. It is a surrender. And Jesus never uses the word surrender in A Course in Miracles. I searched one day. It doesn't ever tell us to surrender. Surrender has a connotation of failure and, you know, not being a success, not, you know, just that whole failure.
No. Giving in makes what you're giving into real.
Yes, exactly, Robin. Exactly. So he doesn't use surrender, but he does use trust. And in the teacher's manual, that's the first attribute. That's the first, you know, I don't know what anything means. That's a glorious place to be in my mind when I recognize I don't know what this means. And it helps me with my brother, because if I don't know what's in my own best interest, how could I possibly know what a brother could know? You know, so trusting God, I think, when I read the manual for teachers now, I see how everything comes together. Each one builds on the other, and you can't have one and accomplish any of the other ones. In fact, all of the concepts given in A Course in Miracles, to me, they're just interlocking. You know, one's always connected. It always goes back to our connectedness and our shared identity and our interdependence on one another. You know, that's so critical. We are all dependent on one another. And the only time we're not at peace is when we try to break off and separate and have our own little world and our own little dream and be the architect of that dream. And boy, I've done that a lot. But I've learned something from it. You know, I can look back on my life now and really see that everything was either a blessing or a lesson. You know, I can feel grateful for everything, because it all contributed to where I am now. And it's, you know, in my, you know, as people on the outside, it looks like consistency, a linear thing. You know, I'm consistent over time, but here it's always a present moment experience for me. I can only be at peace now, here. That's it, with God. And if that looks like a lot of nails strung together, you know, that's on the outside in time, that's what it looks like. But for me, it's always a present moment experience. And I don't try to be at peace. I just try not to be. I try to be. I like before stuff. It's so much easier than the fight against something. It's so much easier to be for God and for the truth than to fight the ego and fight against the ego, fight fear, fight anger, it's so difficult and exhausting to try to fix myself or fix my brother or figure things out. It's so time consuming and it's so exhausting because it's always a seek and do not find, because, you know, as Einstein says, you can't find an answer with the thought system that created the problem. You know, we're looking in the same thought system for answers in the thought system that created the problem. So it's always returning the mind to God for everything. It gets very generalized because whatever shows up in all its varieties of pain, anguish, guilt, anger, it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. The solution is the same for everything. That's why there's no order of difficulty in miracles, because nothing always equals nothing. You know, nothing always equals nothing, no matter how big we make it or how small we make it. The nothingness is the same. There's a line in the Course, and I don't know if I'm going to remember it right, but Jesus talks about when you recognize that, when we don't recognize this, he says we miss out on the joyous realization that nothing has no power. You know, the only real power we have is in God. So that's where, that's where I find my peace.
One of the participants had to go and she wanted to ask you questions about Jesus. She was raised Catholic. For her, he's just symbolic at the moment. So I don't know how she would have phrased the question or posed the question to you. But just if something comes to mind, Janine would be interested to hear about that.
Jesus, for me, it's Christ consciousness. I can say Lana Christ, I can say Robin Christ, Teddy Christ, Kevin Christ. He was Jesus Christ. So as I said before, Lana is a label, and I can assign any meaning to it that I want. But Jesus is a presence, and I identify him as Jesus Christ, and he represents Christ consciousness in the oneness that we all share that Christ consciousness. He's my portal. He's my portal to my right mind. Jesus, when I hear Jesus, just like when they say Holy Spirit, Jesus says Holy Spirit is nothing more than your own right-mindedness, right? So we all, or Jesus is equal. In history, he walked the earth, just like we walk the earth now. But he had such an expanded awareness that he functioned from Christ consciousness on a pretty regular basis. I mean, goodness, he resurrected, his body. So that's what Jesus is to me. And when he comes to me, that, ever since I was a child, that's how I identify him, as Jesus Christ. But he represents Christ's consciousness, which we all share in the oneness of God. That is what the Son of God is. And each one of us, even though it looks like we're little bits and pieces of the whole, we all, Jesus tells us in the Earth text that we all have a soul. And that soul, to demonstrate it in form, is what Jesus did through Christ's consciousness, through the one thing we all share, That's where the oneness is. That is where the oneness is for me, in the Christ consciousness. And I gain access to that. And when I join with it, Jesus Christ speaks to me. And I could say, my husband, Tom Christ, could be coming through, or the tech crew could be coming through. But it all is Christ consciousness, the infinite mind of God. And somehow we have had, there's a portal to access it. And then we identify it with something. But it feels like Jesus. I mean, and I guess it goes back to my first experience on the playground when he held my hand and I had an awareness it was Jesus. And that's who I identify it with, is Jesus. But it's on an equal basis. It's like he's telling me I'm the same as him. I'm part of Christ consciousness too. He's not special. He's wiser because he has an awareness that's much more expanded to mine. So he is always pointing me, and he's always pointing me back to Christ consciousness. He's always pointing me back to the truth. He's always telling me to trust God. He's been my greatest teacher. You know, he's been my partner. He's gotten through me through horrendous situations, life and death situations with myself and my daughter. I remember one night when I was in the pits of despair, Jesus said, walk through it with me. And my fear of my daughter dying, you know, getting that call saying she was found dead, overdosed. You know, I used to pray that she'd be arrested because at least I knew she'd be safe and she'd have a roof over her head, she'd be warm, she'd have food. So one night, and I remember this vividly, I was meditating and he says, let me show you something. And he took me to that place I didn't want to go. He took me to, it was like a visualization of finding my daughter dead. And I can't put this in the words, but it was, the only thing I can say is similar to when I had the 2 heart attacks and I knew everything was okay. And somehow he gave me a knowing that no matter what happened to Maggie, whether she stayed in form or she left form, she was fine, she was safe, and she was perfect. And I had nothing to worry about. And I had that inner knowing. I can't explain it. How do you explain something like that? Because, you know, that seems absurd to say your child's going to die, but it's okay. You know, it doesn't come from there. It comes from a huge, infinite awareness and an inner knowing that could only be divine, that would give me that peace to know in that moment that it's okay. Relax, Lana. She's going to be safe no matter what happens to her. And that can only come through Christ consciousness, through a knowing way beyond my knowing, you know, for that to be not only to be informed of that, but to know that it was true. That was the miracle. I knew that whatever happened to Maggie, she would be fine. She would be fine. And it was okay. So, and it was shortly after that he also told me that the only thing I can do is love her. He said, but that's the most powerful thing you can do in her healing is to love her. Just love her no matter what shows up, no matter how she shows up, high, depressed, angry. You just love her and be a place of peace for her and let her know that no matter what the world does to her, she always has your love because that love will heal her. And it did. It did. God came through again like he always does. You know, and I always say the way to learn to trust is by trusting. There's no other way. You know, it's like the birdies on the tree and the mom says, you can fly, you know, jump off the tree. Or, you know, but it's in the doing of it. It's in the trusting that trust is validated. And then the next time it's a little easier to trust. And that's validated. And pretty soon it becomes like, why would I not trust? That seems, you know, it seems to go against divine logic. Why would I not trust when every time I trust, I get a favorable, happy result, you know? So I just trust God, do what I want. Just trust God. You know, St. Augustine says, love and do what you want. Love and do what you want. Because as long as you're coming from a place of love, you know, your behavior will be appropriate, you know. So, and it'll be good for your brothers and it'll be good for you. It'll strengthen it.
Lana, can I ask you a question? Yeah, my question is, am I spiritually ruined because I have absolutely no relationship to Jesus whatsoever? The relationship with Jesus is just so unimportant, actually. It's not unimportant to you, but to me it is. And that's the same. It's the same thing. It took me years to realize that I'm not religious. I haven't never learned about Jesus, so I don't have an affinity to him. But the Course in Miracles works for me without him.
Let me tell you a quick story about my husband, my second husband. Okay. He always said he was an atheist. But my husband, now he was the kindest, most loving and accepting person I'd ever met. And he always said he was an atheist. And one day I asked him, and this is kind of a gross story, but it's really got a really powerful message in it. I said, when did you decide you were an atheist? And he said it was during World War II. He was in Germany. And he was on the back of a truck, you know, a truck full of soldiers, you know, being driven through one of the bombed out towns. And they hit a landmine. And of course, they were all thrown out of the truck. And he was knocked out. And he says when he came to, he saw a young German mother trying to put the head of her baby back on his body. And he said in that instant, he knew there was no God. But what actually happened, and Jesus kind of gave me a confirmation, was that his concept of God was blown to bits. And he was free. That moment, because he was, you know, he grew up with a concept that there's a judging God in the sky, all powerful, sitting on his throne in the clouds with a beard. His concept of God was destroyed in that moment. He said because no loving God could allow such a horrific thing to happen. And he decided there was no God. But all that he gave up was a concept of God, you know, because, and it freed him. It freed him. He was, I mean, and he lived a life free of, I've got to do this to be okay. I've got to say that to be okay. And he was one of the most authentic people I've ever met. Unless we experience truth, it's a concept. You know, and unless we experience it, you make stuff up and you believe it's real, even God.
Hi, and I read all your stuff. I just love it. So excited to come and hear you this morning, and it's been a joy. It's just so lovely. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I'm so glad the posts are helpful. You know, that's why I share. When Jesus says, you know, to be helpful, and I feel like when I get it, I need to share it. And so I share it to be helpful. You know, and I figure if it can help one person, it's worth posting it, you know, and that's how I feel. So that's good. That makes my heart feel good that it was helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Lana. I really enjoyed that talk as well. And it's so funny because I was journaling this morning after I was doing my lesson, and so many of the things I wrote down, you just addressed directly in there, like about being in the now and conscious awareness stuff. And just amazing how basically you spoke to everything that I put out there this morning. It was awesome. And if there's a chance of just asking a really quick question, I don't know if you'd be able to answer it anyway, but I want to hear about guidance, you know, because I know the course is big on guidance, and I'm pretty sure it's linked to trust, and maybe I don't have that high level of trust enough yet, perhaps, which is spoken about today as well. But I just notice how, I suppose, envious I am when, you know, you get clear messages about what to do when you're feeling like there's a seeming problem that you're faced with, and then you get a clear message about just walk through it with me or whatever. And I'm just so, like, I want that, and it's my prayer every morning to let me go where you would have me go and do what you would have me do and say what you would have me to whom, but I think I get a little bit, not words, but a sense, and the trust is increasing as I put it out there and hand over, and then things turn out okay. But I don't know if there is anything you could say about that.
I can share what's true for me, and the one thing I want to put out, really, I have no control over it. What comes to my mind is not like Helen, received it. Like Helen could stop it and then start it up again. And it comes when it comes, and sometimes it comes when I'm at peace. Sometimes it comes when I'm in the middle of a crisis, like outside the IRS building. When I asked for guidance then, I was in terror. So, and when I started to receiving guidance, it was like a feeling. It was like a definite yes, a definite no. And when I didn't, I kind of took it as do nothing. And I would do nothing until I felt a definite yes or a definite no. And any communication from Jesus or any guidance that I get always contains three things: clarity, certainty, and peace. So whatever comes into my mind, see, we have to own our shared identity. It isn't like there's, and that's a hard thing to get around, get your mind around, because a shared identity is acknowledging that I am one with God. I am part of God. So knowing that, and knowing you have access to infinite knowledge through Holy Spirit, which is our right-mindedness, it's hard to accept. It's hard to accept. And when I write, it's a collaboration between Jesus and me, because I'm the one writing, but the stuff is coming into my mind and no thinking is going on. No thinking is going on my part. The stuff is coming through my mind and I'm typing it on a page. There's no efforting on my part. So I kind of like surrender into it. The same with my painting. When I paint, it's like a joining or a collaboration with God. And I paint two ways. Sometimes I'll have concept in my mind and I'll do a rough sketch and I paint it. Other times I just throw water and paint on that paper, and all of a sudden I'll see a shoreline or a row of trees or a bird or a flower within the blobs of the color. And it like the painting creates itself. Those are the ones that I enjoy doing the most. It's not any thinking. And when I get in, I remember about a month ago, because I was sharing about it, I was late for a morning group phone call. And the reason I was late is I was painting and I lost all track of time. And it was like 3 o'clock in the morning and I saw I was still painting. Time disappears when you fuse yourself, when you join with God. You literally are unaware of your body. You're literally unaware of the only thing I was aware of with my painting was my fingers and the paintbrush. Everything else was like happening. So as far as, I really don't know what to tell you other than trusting not only God, but trusting that part of you that's one with God, because there's no gap, there's no separation. And that's the big acceptance. That's the accepting your innocence and your purity, but your oneness with God. That's so important, because you are no different than Jesus. You are no different than any spiritual, highfalutin person that ever walked this earth. You are an equal. You are an equal. And that's hard to accept. And like I was saying, we have to own our perception. We have to own our identity. When I found out I wasn't Lana, it was like, well, who the hell am I? I'm a child of God. And as a child of God, I have all the power in the universe. I just don't believe it. I just don't believe it. So Jesus keeps reminding me, and of course the miracles keeps reminding us to return to the center, return to God. And where we find him, or where I find him, is when I return to stillness, when I stop thinking. When my mind is still, I can feel his presence. And then it's like, it might come, guidance might come as, like an inspiration, like an intuitive knowing. Like you'll have a thought and it's like, well, where did that come from? Because you didn't think it. It just shows up. You've had those moments when you think, where did that come from? Yeah. Or you just have a gut instinct. It comes, Jesus meets you. You can count on this. Is it Haiti? You can get, the God will meet you where you are. You, for instance, when I just put a question up to the universe. You could call it the universe. And then I stopped thinking about it. If it was about a problem, when I give the problem to God, I stopped thinking about it. Because if I'm still thinking about it, I haven't given it to God. I'm still holding on to it. So I give it to God, or I ask the question, and then I go back to doing whatever I was doing. And but I become like an observer, and I'll see what shows up. I might hear it in the lyrics of a song. I might hear it in that lesson the next day. I might hear it in what somebody says. God will communicate in a way that you can hear him. We just have to pay attention. Pay attention when we ask a question. We pay attention to the people that show up in our lives. Because nobody shows up in our life by accident, be it, somebody we bump into on an elevator or at the convenience store, or someone we meet and fall in love with and marry. People don't show up. Everything is orchestrated by God for us, for our healing and our awakening. And awareness is so key. We got to get it out of time, bring it here. But be here now with God instead of traveling around. That's what I call it, time travel. When I'm not present with God, I'm time traveling. And time, like I said in the beginning, time is the illusion, not just a part of the illusion. Everything that's illusional is wrapped up somehow in time. And, and as we forgive, we collapse time until the need for time is no more. And with every healing, we do that. So, and where we do that is in the present moment.
Well, thanks for coming, Lana. It's been lovely having you here, because some of us have been doing Rules for Decision recently, and I really noticed a lot of the stuff you said matches in really well with Rules for Decision. And I like that game that you played at the beginning of the talk, that little game that you played. I'm going to give that a go. Right. I'm going to listen to the talk again and give that a go. It sounds like it'd be a bit of fun.
Yeah, you just give everything for one day. You just have one day at a time. For one day, you just give everything permission to be whatever it wants to be. And you'll be surprised what a peaceful day you'll have by doing that. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye now. God bless you. And thank you for listening to all my blabber. And I'm going to come back and visit soon, I think. Okay?
If everyone wants to just have 5 minutes, just quiet time before we sign off, to sink back and rest.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. That's